do that, let me pay a quick tribute to the national parks. Certainly speaking for myself, the romance, the lifelong love affair with wildlife, for most of us, I dare say, began in one of those lovely national parks. The Valmiki Thapars of the world, the Bitu Sehgals of the world, the Hemendra Kotaris of the world would not be doing what they're doing today if it wasn't for those national parks. We can't take them for granted. It's not coincidental that if you start traveling west of India or east of India, virtually nothing is left. It's not till you get pretty much to Europe that you start to get real environmental norms that provide for conservation the way India has. So the Forest Department's done a terrific job, and we have to really acknowledge that. That said, there's a couple of things I'll draw your attention to. The entire national park program is built around the iconic tiger. And of course, when I used to initially wonder why that was, the reason that was given is that if you save the tiger, you save the entire ecosystem which the tiger lives in. That has a flip side. Okay? Is that better now? Okay. Is this better now? Yeah. That's what it was. That's what it was. I was too high. So I was talking about why national park conservation alone was all built around iconic species like tigers, which of course meant that densely forested areas were protected. The flip side is that everything which wasn't tiger habitat is really struggling. So very charismatic animals like wolves, like hyenas. I've been going to Indian national parks for now 30 years. The first hyena I saw was in December in Jawai. Never seen a wolf still, but I'm told if I go to Jawai often enough, Jessel, there's a real chance I could see a wolf there as well. So the very first thing which I'll draw your attention to is if you truly want to preserve biodiversity, and India has absolutely epic biodiversity, if you want to protect the wetlands, particularly the grasslands, the fact is that the current scheme, which is to protect areas where tigers live, just isn't good enough. Let me move to the second point, which speaks particularly directly to the challenge which the Chief Minister threw out. India is a very poor country. Land is under tremendous pressure from all sides. And yet, if I think about my 3 decades of going to Africa, countries like Kenya, Namibia, particularly Botswana, are living proofs of countries which are also very, very poor and yet have managed to save and preserve some of the most spectacular areas not inside national parks. How has it worked? Very straightforward. Let's do an economic yield calculation. Okay? Plan A, you've got farmers who are typically living in horribly subdivided plots. Now, this is not true for all farming, but particularly in areas which are very dependent on monsoons, that yield is both highly unpredictable and frankly sometimes just not enough. The farmers go into that cycle of debt, and we've seen the tragedies which happen, particularly in the state of Maharashtra and Andhra Pradesh. Africa has exactly the same problems. The solution there, of course, was to calculate the economic yield of taking that land and seeing what happens when you bring in high-value tourism, create a framework where those benefits can be shared back with the community. The simple economic logic is such that we don't even need to appeal to things like biodiversity and the topic I'll come to in a minute, which is climate change and deforestation. Those are terrific causes, of course. But the real beauty, the magic which I've seen work, is I've seen the dollars and cents of conservation turn into spectacular success stories. So I'll give you a couple of specific examples. Namibia, it's a very good example. There's 50 millimeters of rainfall, and yet there were farmers in Damara trying to cultivate that land, living horrible lives, competing with rhinos, desert-adapted elephants, desert-adapted lions. The government has put in place schemes where those people have been incented to move off. That land has been restored to tourism. So now not only do you have some of the most spectacular viewerships, you actually generate very, very high-end jobs, and those communities have been resettled to towns nearby where they have access to healthcare and all the facilities. India simply does not have that framework at all. In a minute we'll have Dave Bharti, who's probably the pioneer, and in fact one of the most spectacular experiences I had, Dave, was not in Kruger National Park, but in Sabi Sands, specifically at Londolozi, which you developed. So this isn't an idea which is pie in the sky. Many of you in the audience, I know, frequently go to Africa, I cannot think of too much of this framework which shouldn't apply to India. What's required is a framework. What's required is for the benefits to go back to the communities, which they patently don't do today in the current scheme of national park-based preservation. What's required is a feeling that wildlife will finally pay for itself. And let me finish then, Jason, with an appeal to a point which is particularly Indian, which has to do with the cycle of monsoons. Ours is not a country which receives annual soaking rain through the year the way the country in which I currently live, England, does. We get tremendous amounts of rain, 1,000 millimeters, all within a month and a half, and then that's gone. So you'll first get floods, and then you get droughts in exactly the same area. The only way to control for that, of course, is to preserve the forest cover. So to me, a solution which preserves biodiversity, celebrates the very charismatic species we have, which no one talks about. The fact is, around campfires in Africa, when wildlife aficionados talk, from Botswana they'll go to Namibia, they'll go to Kenya, maybe they'll go to the Pantanal in Brazil. Let me tell you, this is an entire market which never talks about India. And there's no reason why we shouldn't be competing for that. But most of all, a country like ours, which winds up alternating between droughts and huge monsoon-driven floods, preserving that forest cover is an option that we really don't have. What's required is a framework. Let's talk more about that.